in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to CAD-1 and BD Mackey Consulting's presentation Revit Adaptive Components. This is the second in the series on Revit Adaptive Components. My name is Stan Henne here at CAD-1, and I have Brian Mackey, owner of BD Mackey Consulting, here with me today. So we're looking forward to another good presentation. I have to admit that we do Revit Radio right before this, and I see many of the same names here, so they'll know what I'm talking about. And it's always hard to kind of come off the Revit Radio and
the non-political correctness of Revit Radio to the more serious and down-to-earth actual webcasts.
Yeah. So anyway, this is a great topic, and just so that you know that. We do record these. We don't record Revit Radio, but we do record these, and if the recording goes well, we will have it posted on our YouTube page and the CAD-1 events page within the next few days. So with that, Brian, do you have any preamble you want to talk about? There's our famous screen with the mic and speakers and the telephone, the minimize console, the raise your hand button, and the all-important Ask Questions box. Please feel free to ask any questions you have. We'll try and answer them in context and move through things.
And that's the big thing. Ask the questions as I'm doing it. A lot of times, if you wait to ask the question at the end, I'm not going to remember what I said at the beginning. So ask the questions as we're going through, and we'll try to answer them, and that way it makes sense to everybody.
Let's see. And Brian, let's put in a plug, if we can, for the Rhombus group as well.
Yeah, so for those of you, it looks like most people are in the Denver market there. We do have a BIM users group. It's the Rocky Mountain Building Information Society, known as Rhombus without an H. So if you guys are interested in getting together and doing some open collaboration, talking more about the BIM and the tools they're using, we meet the third Tuesday of every month. This month we're going to be meeting at R&L offices next Tuesday. So if you want to look us up, we're on the Meetup site. So if you go to meetup.com/rhombus, again without an H, R-O-M-B-I-S, you should be able to check it out, see what we're all about, and hopefully you'll join and come in. We've almost hit 100 members, which is pretty good. We've only 4 months old. We're at 96, so we're hoping to get our 100th member today.
And it's a real good group, real down to earth, and some very good discussions on the broader topic of BIM and not just Revit type users group, although there's a lot of that discussion as well. So with that, let's get started.
So we've already talked a lot about the last one, adaptive components, and just kind of getting into the basics of adaptive components. Showed a little bit about adding parameters, using reporting parameters. We did a parapet type roof enclosure, not roof parapet, excuse me, a roof cricket. So went through and showed you how to do roof cricket. I'm going to get a little bit more advanced in the adaptive components this time. We're going to play some more on some masses. I also want to get into using, I was just going to call it kind of like a reporter or a reactions type scenario. So we'll jump into that and get going on. I think that's pretty much it for the PowerPoint slide. So I'll go ahead and jump into Revit.
Juliana, I know, and Brian, maybe you can answer. I know that they're working on getting an online hookup set up for the Rhombus group. I'm not sure where you're at right at the moment. I haven't been there for the past couple months, unfortunately.
The committee met last week, and we're pretty much going to determine that we're going to try it out in February. We're not sure how it's going to work because ours aren't really presentations, they're more roundtable discussions. So we're not exactly sure how well it's going to work having people, logged in. We'll probably use the same GoToMeeting. I'm not sure I'm going to get it to work with GoToMeeting and people typing in questions, being involved in the conversation. So we're not 100% sure, but I know we're definitely going to try it next month with a lot of the users we have up in northern Colorado in the Fort Collins area and see how that works with them. So speaking of which, Chad, I'm going to be sending you an email on that. So let's jump into the presentation. So I really wanted to be going through and start talking about and figuring out how can we use more of the adaptive components. And we talked about how they're pattern-based generic models and adaptive component generic models. And as you can see, a lot of the stuff we're doing in here, it's really great to start using these adaptive components. So a lot of different flexibilities for those. I used them again yesterday doing a growing arched ceiling inside of a project. I used it with my wife creating some generic wall type stuff that would react to other things going on. So it worked really, really well. But today I want to start jumping in and showing you what a reactor is inside of Revit. It's not really an actual term using the term reactor. But as you can kind of look at this beautiful tower I have going on here, I think my screen's paused, so here we go. Looks like it's showing up again.
I was going to say, we're not seeing anything here.
So as you kind of come in here and start looking at this beautiful bubble tower, as I like to call it, you can see how the bubbles down here in the bottom or left corner are a little bit bigger than they are in the middle and on the right. And the reason for this is these are all set up as a reactor. So if I just take this little point here, it's going to take it a few seconds to update. But as I take this point and move it around, all of the objects on here are going to start reacting to what that point's doing. So there's a lot of different reasons why we can use a reactor. I've seen people create it for sunshades. Hey, let's go put these on our building, and let's put this little dot basically where the sun's supposed to be representing. And as they move it around, they can see the size of the panels grow and maybe point towards where the sun would be. There's some other automatic tools you can do with helping in the creation of that. So you start going through and really getting into it, it's allowing it to have points of references. You can have more than one reactor or not, and understanding what's going on with those points. So if you saw that quick little jump there on the screen, then now I've got these giant bubbles down here, and I've got these little itty-bitty tiny ones that are up next to that reactor point. So the question on this becomes, A, how do we create the reactor point or an object using a reactor? And B, how do we get into, hosting those into a project? So a lot of different tools on this. I know Marcelo created one at an AU and RTC conference where you would change the little angle of the dot and it would change the color of the hood on this truck he had modeled. So a lot of different reasons why we can do it. But let's just first start off about talking about how did I create this. It was actually a pretty simple family. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in, I'm going to grab a new generic model, adaptive component, and of course I've got to wait for my application menu to freak out when I'm online. So I'm going to go ahead and do new family. It's going to be a generic model adaptive. And we'll just go ahead and open that. So it's the same template you saw me start with last month when I presented the basics of this. So this one's going to be fairly simple like we did last time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start drawing a couple of reference points. So I'm going to go up to my application, or my, not my application, my ribbon. I'm going to go to my Create tab, and I'm going to grab Reference. I'm going to grab Point. I'm going to go ahead and just place 2 points on the drawing. Doesn't matter where you place these. A lot of times I place one of them at the intersection of the 2 grids just because, I'm a little bit weird that way. But I'm going to grab 2 points and place them. And now I'm going to select those 2 points, and just like we did last month, I'm going to go ahead and say, let's make these 2 points adaptive. So not a big deal at all. We've got this nice adaptive 2 points there, point 1, point 2. If you really wanted to be the other option, the other direction, you can always grab any one of these adaptive points and change the number. And unlike other things in Revit, it will just automatically update the other one. So if I have 6 points on there and I rename 5 to be 6, 6 will become 5, etc. So Revit automatically goes through and says, hey, by the way, these are the order I'm going to change them in. It's not going to give you, enter a unique name like a grid would or something like that. It's just really going to go through and update that for you. So I'm going to go draw a reference line at this point in time. And what I want to do when I draw this reference line is I want to make sure, this is very critical when you're dealing with adaptive points, that you're paying attention to the 3D snapping or not, and what you're snapping to. So I'm going to turn my 3D snapping on this reference plane, and I'm going to come up here and wait to make sure it's highlighting the point. I'm always paying attention to my status bar. I'm paying attention to my tooltip. Am I actually grabbing the points? And am I actually grabbing the points over here? And I just want to get that object between those 2 points. And if I did it correctly, when I take this and move it around, you're going to see that that point actually, or the reference line is going to be moving with that point. So now that I've done that, what I want to do is I'm going to go set my work plane to be the horizontal plane on this reference line I've just drawn in here. So I'm going to come in here, grab this horizontal plane on my reference line, and now that becomes my work plane. If you want to make sure you've got the right thing selected, you can always hit the Show button. And now you can see I've got that reference line selected. It's showing me that's what the work plane is. And the big reason why I wanted to have that my work plane is I'm going to go ahead and just do a dimension on that work plane because I want it to stay on the work plane. I want it to be parallel to the bubble, or if those points move up or down. So I'm going to go do an align dimension. And now again, I'm going to go from the adaptive point to the other adaptive point. It's going to go ahead and place that dimension. Again, you'll see if I take it, I move it, I adjust it around, it's going to be changing that length for me. So with that said, what I'm going to do for this reaction is I'm going to go through, for the reactor, is I want to be able to classify the distance these 2 are apart. So I'm going to go label this dimension, and I'm going to label this dimension as a reporting parameter. So So I'm going to go ahead and label it. I'm going to add a parameter. And I'm going to call this one my distance. I'm going to make it an instance-based parameter, and it wants to be a reporting parameter. Now you'll also notice on here it says they can be used to extract values from geometric conditions and report in a formula as a scheduled parameter. The one thing about this is if you're going to use it in a formula, you have to grab host objects. What I mean by that is if I had not snapped to the adaptive points, but snapped to the ends of the reference line, it would not let me use that value in a formula. So it's kind of a key thing there. I was at an AU presentation, and one of the guys was just cruising along doing it really fast, and the thing kept blowing up on him, and it was because he was grabbing the end of the reference line, not the points. So you just really have to take a step back, pause for a distance, and make sure you're actually grabbing host objects. So those two done, you're going to see that now what's great about that is there's my distance value. It's grayed out. It's reporting what's coming back, and it's even letting me know this is a reporting parameter. So now that that's done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go add another parameter that's going to react to that. So I'm going to go ahead and just add a radius parameter. I'm going to make it instance-based, and I'll say OK. So now I've got this radius parameter inside of here. So what I could do is just take the radius parameter, do something like, hey, this is going to be the distance divided by 10. So even though it's 20 feet, it's going to give me a 2-foot radius. This is basically what I've done with those little bubble scenarios, is I set it up, went through and did that, and now it's going to set this in there. If you want to make it even more flexible, you can actually add another parameter, and we'll just call this one our scale or something. I'm going to make this a number parameter, the instance as well. So instead of just saying take that and divide it by 10, I can say let's take that and divide it by the scale. So now if I wanted to come in here and I get into a project and change it, oh, these are too small, these are too big, these are too whatever, I can come in here and just change the value of the scale and allow it to start changing the radius that we're dealing with there. So take the distance, divide it, multiply it, do whatever you want to do, but use that kind of more as a reaction to see what we're going through here. So now that I've got my formulas, I can't find solution really. I love it when it says that, and I haven't even done anything yet. Okay, let's try that again. We'll just say take the distance, if I could spell correctly, divided by 10. It's the exact same thing I just had, but it's not working. Let's say divide by 5. Okay, I don't know why my scale is not working on this one. Maybe it's because I made it a number and not an integer. Oh, now it's working. Great! So there's the nice nuances of Revit. You can tell it's a live presentation when things start going wrong. Okay, so now that I've got that done, all I'm going to simply do is create a new object that's going to be hosted on this point, in this case my little bubble, and start using that to change the diameter of it. So again, I'm going to pay attention to where my work plane is. I'm going to go ahead and set my work plane to be the horizontal part of this adaptive point. So I'm using my tab key to make sure I get that horizontal point. I guess it could be a vertical point. It's not really going to matter. Now that I've got that set, I'm just simply going to go draw a circle. So I'm going to go draw a reference circle. You could do a model circle. It really wouldn't matter. And I'm going to pick my center line to be my point. And I'm going to draw my circle outside of here. So now with the circle drawn, I'm just going to go ahead and make that dimension active, and I'm going to assign that to my radius parameter that we've already got set up. So now you can see that's updated. If I take this point and start moving the point around, the radius is changing as I move the point. Spin this a little bit so I can get the other grip. So as I move my little point around, you can see my radius is changing, it's updating, it's doing what I need it to do. So with that said, I'm just going to take that circle and I'm going to go ahead and tell Revit to create a form. And it's not giving me the sphere. Oops. It's usually how I do it. I wonder if it's because that's a reference line. Let's go ahead and just make that a regular line. It's exactly how I did the other one. See, I learned something new. If it's a reference line, it doesn't give you the sphere option. If it's a model line, it does. So what I did on that, I'm going to undo back. This was modeled as a reference line, and it should have been a model line. It's very simple in Revit to change it. You've got in the properties of any line is reference. If you uncheck it, it becomes a model line. If you check it, it becomes a reference line. So it'll let you bounce back and forth between reference lines and model lines. So I should have made that a model line. And I'll go ahead and select that model line and say create form. Revit's going to ask me, do I want a cylinder or a sphere? I'll just go ahead and do it as the sphere. So now I should be able to come in here, play with the adaptive point, and as I move the point in, you can see it's starting to adjust. So that's great. We'll go ahead and load this into the project. We'll just put it into my bubble tower again. Okay. Now when we go to place this, ooh, come on, stop freaking out on me. I'm just going to delete what's in here out so I can go place it from start. So what I've done is I've actually taken a cylinder. Actually, I should probably go through and do the cylinder and show you guys how I did the cylinder too, because mapping was a few months ago. So I've done and created a cylinder, and I'll go back and redo this real quick, and then we're going to grab that cylinder and we're going to start dividing the surface. So I'm going to go create another new family, and of course I get to wait for my application menu. We'll go create a very similar mass to this or some other type of mass. So we'll go create a new family. Actually, we'll create a new conceptual mass. And all I did on that mass is basically I came in and I drew a model circle. Could be a reference circle. I will do the reference circle so you can kind of see the difference here. I'm just going to draw that reference circle. And then how I do these a lot of times is I'll just draw that reference circle and its host is the level. So if I select the line and the level and then I copy them, I can now just start coming through here and making a few copies of this, and it's going to be the same thing in the same location. So a lot of times I'll just draw one on the level, copy the level and the circle up, and now I've got that sitting there. Because what it allows me to do is then go grab all of those circles, say create form, and I've got this beautiful cylinder. Then if I come in here and grab one of the lines in the cylinder, I'm going to go into X-ray mode to do this. I can change the radius of these. I could parameterize these if I wanted to, and really start coming in here to be able to play with what I wanted that to do. Okay, so we've got this beautiful little mass sitting here. You know, I don't know, beautiful is a relative term in this case. What I'm going to do with that mass is I'm going to select the outside faces, and I use my tab key. You could do the whole mass if you wanted to. So like I could just grab the entire mass and do this. I personally like to do it on a face-by-face basis because I don't like to see all the excessive grid points that I'm going to get on the outside. And with those two faces selected, I'm just going to go ahead and say, let's divide the surface. Now, this is one that got me, and I talked about this a couple months ago when I did masses, is once I've got those surfaces divided, I guess I missed the divide surface. Let me try that again. I don't want the whole mass. There we go. I'm going to say divide surface. My surface divisions must be off. But there's this nice little surface representation under here, and this is kind of one that got me when I first did this. I kept seeing everybody demo this, and it's like, man, they're snapping to nodes. You can turn the nodes on the surface, and then it should start showing you all the nice little noded dots. And I'm wondering if it's turned off in my visibility graphics. No. Nesting, form, everything's turned on. I have no idea where my bubbles are not showing up. Let's just divide the whole entire mass. No, it's not showing up. What is going on here? Man, definitely a live presentation. I've done this 100 times in the past. And today, nothing's working for me. All right. So at any rate, I'm going to close out of this. That's what I did on the other mass, and I'll go back and play with it. I don't know what's going on with this one. I'll have to figure that out. So everything's turned on. So we'll come back to this mass. And you're going to see in this mass that I'm not seeing the actual mass shape, because in your surface representation, you can actually tell it to turn on the grids. You can even tell it to turn on the original surface. So had I divided that other mass, it should have started looking something like this with all the grid lines inside of it. And you will notice that that's not like a setting like we get in the Revit project. This is an individual surface setting. So it originally came in, I'm like, oh, turn on all the nodes, turn on all the UV grids, etc. But you'll notice that's different for each family you get into. So now I can turn the UV grid intersections on this side. So this is what it should have looked like on the other family, and I don't know what was happening with that one. I'm going to turn off the original surface. So now I've got this nice little gridded pattern here and this object going on over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go place an adaptive point. Personally, for me, I like those to be able to be on a vertical grid. So I'm going to grab that center vertical grid, and I'm going to go up and say I want to do a reference point. And if I had that selected first, that becomes my work plane when I go to do this. So I'm going to place that reference point there. And that's literally all I've done. Just placed a reference point. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go take that family we just created, and I'm going to start placing that family. And I'm going to take it and place the first pick point on that reactionary point we've created. Then I'm going to come down here and grab one of these other points and place it. So now you can see that if I take this point here, so if I take the point here and start moving this point around, that bubble is going to change sizes. It's just using a reactor to go through and do what I want it to do. Now, in the old releases of Revit, I would literally have to go through and place it on all 500 of those little triangles we have over there. What's nice about 2013 is I can come in here and go through and just say, okay, let's create a repeater. It's basically the array command like you see in a normal project. I'm going to go ahead and hit let's do the repeat. And it's going to understand I took that to one of the points on this half of the mess, and it'll go ahead and copy it around.
Kevin, I'm not sure what that audio delay is coming from. We don't have anything unusual on here or any dual mics or repeating or anything.
Usually there's a video delay, not an audio delay.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Okay.
I'll just talk slower.
Yeah.
Maybe I can catch up to my echo.
We'll hope it stays better now.
So now you can see that since I did it on the one half of the mass, it brought it up to the other half of that mass. And the reason I really like doing this bubble is we added that value in there to be able to go in and say, oh, what is that going to be? So I can select my repeater and start going into the properties of that. So I'm going to tab in to get one of those values. And then I can come in here and say, ooh, instead of a scale of 5, let's go ahead and do a scale of 10. Going to take it a minute to process. So you can add that little scale value to be able to adjust it and get it to improve and update. You can set it up however you want, but it's really starting to be able to go in and get families to react to other things. You can really start getting in the nesting and have this react to levels if you load it into a project. If we have time towards the end, I'll go through and show you how on the ones where Desi and I were just playing with something, we're trying to get some structural analysis tools out of. Just go through and I'll show you how we did that, and I hosted those in a project to actual levels. So now you can see it's all done. Again, there are 2 masses on there, so it only does it on one side. So if I wanted to do it on the other side, I'd have to come across here. Again, same scenario. Grab that point, grab one of the points over here, and just tell Revit to repeat that. So how you can set up reactors. If I wanted to, I could have put an additional point on this side of the mass. So one half is reacting to one point, the other half is reacting to another point. I could go through and break the mass up into different divided surfaces and only grab, the bottom half to this point, the top half to that point. However you want to set up, you can have as many reactors as you want. It's just what are you hosting those to. So now as you can see, it's like, oh wow, that's looking really cool. Again, relative term for cool. However, I did instance based on these ones of 10. These ones are still 5, so I should probably tab in to get one of those and change those. Let's go 20 and make them really small. So you can even make it different in the different areas if you've got instance-based parameters to do it, whatever you feel like you need to do there. So that's how you can start using some of the reactors, just giving you a basic idea. I should have done that. I keep forgetting this takes forever to regenerate. So as you can see with the 20, it's looking a little bit crazier. This was actually, as a joke, I was playing with this. We were working on an air traffic control tower with one of my clients, and I told him that, look, this air traffic control tower has a built-in safety device for planes crashing into it. You can move the slider away, and it's instant airbags. Yeah, I thought it was funny. Nobody else did either, so I can still hear the crickets chirping. I chuckled. You chuckled. So the other type of component that I want to talk about that we can do on here, and I think this is the right one on here, is I've actually created this panel. Let's grab this one up here. And this is a 9-point pick panel. And I was just doing this because on several projects I get into with clients, they're always asking me, well, how big is this? What's the size of that panel? And on something curved like this, well, how far am I out of, straight from point 3 to point 9, or from point 1 to 3, or what are we looking at there? How much is this actually curving? So I've created another adaptive component using not reactors, but using, again, some more of the reporting parameters to see exactly what's going on here. So how is this panel coming in? And as you can see, deformation at point 2, it's 1'10", and I can give you the differences on all these different shapes. So if we were to go on and put this on like an elliptical shaped mass or something, I can really start to display and report all of those values that this is going to be. So I've got this created just to kind of give you an idea of what it's going to look like. And we'll go through and work onto the setting here. So this is that panel that's inside of there. It's this deformation panel for telling me how far each curve is going to be deformed. And hopefully I can remember how I created this because it was a while ago, but we'll go through and we'll create this object. And the big tip that I use on this one, and it's one that I always like to show people, I was kind of talking a little bit about this last month, is when you put adaptive points down, you can also tell them to host on intersections. That's really where I'm going to use the tool, the benefit of this one when we go through. So I'm going to do a new family. Again, it's just going to be a generic model adaptive. And I'm going to go ahead and place all of those points I wanted it to be. And in this case, it's just going to be a 9-point family. So I'm going to go do my reference points again. And I'm not totally paying attention to where these points are going to be. However, I am paying attention to the order I am placing them because I don't want to have to go back and reorder those. When I do these, I kind of go 1, 2, 3, start over, 4, 5, 6, start over, 7, 8, 9. If you wanted to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in a spiral, it's completely up to you and what your pick preferences are. I know I worked with one client, they always like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and kind of going back and forth through it. Completely up to you. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here, I'm going to create those adaptive points. And then just to make my life a little bit easier, I'm going to start moving some of these around. So I don't have them all flat on the work plane. They're going to kind of be up in the middle. So I'm going to grab 2, 5, and 8 and move those around. And I'm going to go draw some reference lines in here. And again, my 3D snapping's turned on. I'm going to go from point, I missed it, try that again. I'm going to go from point 1 to point 3. I'm going to go from point 1 to point 7, and 7 to 9, and 3 to 9. Okay, so I just want to go ahead and post those in there. Got them all set up. I'm actually going to take point 4 and 6 and move them up a little bit as well. So some other tools that we can do that are really, really beneficial as well is what we can do is we can come in here and grab 3 points and come up and say create a spline through points. And that's going to give us a nice, beautiful arc on this. So rather than having to try to go through and draw this, I will usually just grab my points, say create a spline through those points. By default, what it does with those, I thought I moved point 8 up. By default, what it does with those is it's creating an arc through those 3 points, and it makes them a model line, not a reference line like I like it to be. So not a big deal, because all I'm going to do is come in here and grab that model line, and all of them actually, and go through and check, just like you saw me do earlier, it is reference. So now I've got reference lines on those. Okay, so it's looking kind of similar to what we had. Oh, I don't need that one anymore. So looking similar to this one, I've got this inside of here. I've got the arc here. I'm going to need another arc going through the middle there. Ooh. So, oh, I got that one going. So it's looking pretty good. So now what I can do is just grab those 3 arcs and say create form. If I wanted to, ooh, that did not do what I was expecting it to do. Oh, it's because I grabbed 2 reference lines there. So I'm going to grab those 3, say create form, and there's my nice fancy little form. Again, you'll see if I start pushing and pulling these shapes, the form is going to start going across and dividing with it. Okay, so it's working pretty well. Now, one of the things I want to do inside of here, now that I've got that shape created, is I want to host points on 2, 4, 6, and 8. So I'm going to start hosting some points on there. And the reason I'm going to host those points, I'm going to need to be able to go in here and start creating reference lines through those. So when I take the points in this finished file, you're going to see that when I move this point up here and this point down here are moving with that object. And the reason they're moving with that object is these 2 points above and below are actually hosted to the adaptive point. So I'm going to go ahead and come back into my project, my file, And I'm going to go ahead and host some points on all of these. And just for now, I'm going to go to my sunglasses and hide the element. Okay? So I'm going to host some points on this, on this, on this. I'm going to go ahead and hide this reference line because I get confused easily, and I'm going to hide that one as well. So I'm going to go do a reference point, and the key on this is to set your work plane. I can't talk and stress enough in adaptive components that you make sure you've got the correct work plane set. If you don't, you're going to be like driving yourself crazy and what's going on, why isn't this working for me? So I'm going to set the work plane. I'm just going to grab grid 2 right now. Again, I'm going to grab the horizontal, and I'm going to place a point there. Actually, I'm going to place 2 points there, and Revit's going to yell at me. So I'm going to go in and set my work plane again to grid 6, and I'm trying to find the horizontal point on 6, and I'm going to place 2 points and get yelled at. Set my work plane for points on 4, place 2 points, come over here and set it on point 8. And get yelled at again. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go grab one of the points on each of those. And what's great about these points is if you get them hosted correctly and if they're on the correct work plane, all of your points have an offset value. So I can come in here and start giving them an offset value. And you'll see that when I go ahead and say offset them up 10, they all go up 10 feet. I'm going to go grab the other points now and basically do the same thing. I think I missed that one. And I'll go grab my offset value. And this time I'm going to offset them down, so I'm going to do a -10. And as you can see, all of those points moved up or down. So again, you can see I always check it out. If I drag it up or down, it's moving up and down like it should be doing exactly what I wanted it to do. Okay? Now, I want to be able to parameterize this because if I get a deformation that's greater than 10 feet, this can actually break me. So I'm going to go ahead and add some parameters for that offset. We're going to create a new one. I'm just going to call it offset. No, not a new type. I hate it when I do it. Anybody else hate it when they do that? I do it all the time. So I'm going to create a new parameter. I'm going to call it offset. And I'm going to add a new parameter and call it offset negative because I want one that's the negative of it. And what's great about the offset negative is all I do is say take offset and multiply it times a -1. So if I come into my offset and say it's 10, that's going to be a -10. If I come up here and say this one's 10, the other one's going to be a -10. So I always just do one that's positive and one that's negative. Works really well for me. Let's actually go back and change that to be 10. So now with that said, I'm going to grab all these points that are down low and set those up to the offset negative. And grab these points up high and set them to the offset. So I really want to get these all set up, being tall, doing what I want those to do. And there's multiple different ways to do what I'm doing with this deformation panel. You get a deformation at the center, at the ends. But now that I've got this done, I'm going to come through here and grab the points at each one and say spline through points. Because if you only have 2 points and you do a spline, you create a line. So spline through points. I could have done a reference line and snapped as well. That would have worked, but I find it more comfortable for me to do it this way because then I know I'm basically going through and getting a perfectly straight line through the points that are desired. I'm also going to turn those points into reference lines, or those reference lines, model lines into reference lines. And so now we've got this. I move it up, I move it down. You can see it's starting to work. So now the key thing to get the deformation on what's happening with this is I'm going to go host another reference point, but now I'm going to host that reference point on those vertical lines. So I'll put one on each vertical line that I've created. And as you can see, if I take one of those points and move the point around, it's moving up and down, everything's moving with that point. It's kind of critical to go through and test all of these to make sure you've done it correctly or doing what needs to happen there. Now the key point on this is to then grab that point you've done. Since that is not an adaptive point or a placement point, it's going to allow us to come up and say host points at an intersection. So that point is already hosted on this vertical reference line. I want to host it as well to this horizontal reference line. So now when I start coming in here moving this up and down, that's not just staying where it is, and even if it's out too far, it's understanding I'm hosting on that work plane, moving up and down with it, moving side to side. It's all doing what I need it to do. And of course I have the panel hidden, but in the background the panel's changing shape and getting deformed as well. So I'm going to grab each one of those points and say host by intersection. Grab this point, host it by an intersection, and grab this point and host it by an intersection. Sometimes it takes Revit a minute to find the host by intersection button. Come on. All right. So now, with that said, what I'm going to do is go start grabbing dimensions between the two. So very critical to go through and set your work plane to be the vertical grid line. You can do it on either plane, you can do it on that one or that one, but to grab those reference lines and make sure that becomes your work plane. Because now I'm going to go ahead and do my dimension, excuse me, from point to point and pull it out. Set my work plane over here. I personally like them to go outside, so I like to do that work plane, and then from point to point, come over here, set my work plane on this side. Again, doing my dimension from point to point. I do have to say that is one thing that's kind of nice in the program is if you're in a command and you grab set work plane, it does not kick you out of the command. It just sets the work plane while in that command. Okay, so now those are all set. They're doing what I want them to do. Let me go ahead, turn everything back on. So as you can see, if I come in here and start taking this panel and changing the shape of this panel, I'm getting how far out of deformation it is. If you wanted to know what it was at the center point, you could draw a line from point to point, do the same thing. I'm not going to go too far into that. So now we've got this all set up. So the only thing that we would have to do next is to come inside of here and start adding parameters for this. Now, if you plan on scheduling this in a project, you're going to have to add shared parameters for this. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my parameters, and I'm going to go ahead and add some parameters, and I believe I have some shared parameters set up for this. This is not my parameter file, so let me go browse in my parameter file. What happens when you share your Revit nerdness with your wife? She goes in and starts using her parameter file. All craziness starts to ensue. I thought it was right there. Is it here? And so I think inside of here, under miscellaneous, where do I have that? I know I have it somewhere. Dang it. I guess we're going to be creating some shared parameters that I thought I had, but I don't. Yeah. Oh, massing. There we go. So we're going to come in here. I'm going to go grab deformation edge 1. Actually, I just got to say OK to this first. So under the massing, I'm going to grab deformation edge 1. It is going to be a reporting parameter. I say OK, I go add another one, shared parameter, get into my massing, edge 2, another new parameter. So you really start getting in here and reporting all of the actual sizes inside of here. I had one client tell me that, oh, I can do that in Rhino, you can't do that in Revit, and I pulled this panel out, put it into a project, said, here you go, look, it's done. Yes, I can actually schedule all of that information and give it to you on that. So it might be a little bit different process than Rhino, but you should be able to go through and do it. So I've got deformation edge 1, so I'm going to go ahead and call this 1 because there's my 1, 2, 3. I will label this parameter for edge 1. I don't know, I'll call the bottom edge 2. Call this one edge 3. And this one edge 4. All right? So the only way to check to make sure it's going to work is to go ahead and load this into a project. And we'll use it on the bubble tower. So now when I go to place this adaptive component, since it is an adaptive component in this scenario, I'm going to come through and start grabbing the points. If I just wanted to go straight up the mass, I could do that. The one thing that's really weird when doing these adaptive components, and as I'm going to go apply a repeater to this later, a lot of times you might apply this one to what you think is the correct point, but it might be the point on this half of the mass. So usually before I go do those, I'm going to hide with my sunglasses that half of the mass. I'm just going to delete these out too. So I'm going to get that out of the mass because sometimes I'll host these on the wrong points, and then I've got to go back and rehost the points, and it becomes a little bit of a pain. So we'll grab this point mass in here, and on this half, I'm just going to go straight up. 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, 8, 9. So there's my nice, simple panel. If I grab that panel and look at it, that's how far I'm deforming on each thing. So on this edge, it's 2'3". On the bottom edge, it's 2 inches. On the side edge, it's 2 foot, and the top edge. And you'll see that if I take that and place it in up towards the top, I'll get different numbers because of the different distances, the different radii, etc. So it's kind of one of these nice little tools to be able to go through here and get into this, set it up. I can also now take this and repeat it. And since that was placed on one half of the mass, I'm believing it'll go all the way up, but sometimes I get weird results. So there you go, it went all the way up. Here's the weird part. If you repeat this, the numbers don't change. So when I place it in here and use the repeater command, I am getting the exact same value for every single panel. This is not going to be the same value up here as it was down here, right? So it's the exact same numbers I have there as I have here. Yet if I go in later and put it in up here manually, I guarantee it's going to be some different numbers. So just a heads up on this, if you are doing it, 3, 2, 3, we'll just do it up here in the middle. If I come up here and do it on this one, I'm going to get different numbers. So it's something that I've asked a couple people on. I haven't formally submitted a request yet. And they were kind of like, we haven't noticed it, so I don't know if it's something that I do. But anytime I use a repeater, it gives me the same value on my reporting parameters. So wanted to give a heads up on that, let people know that is an issue. So if you're really getting into this and you need to do every panel size, you might have to go through and do each one individually. Okay? So the nice part about this, and I'm not going to fill them all out on this project, is if I then were to take that mass and load it into a project, inside of my project, I could then go ahead and create a schedule for that. So you can see I've got all of these different panels inside of here. I've actually, on these ones, done them slightly different. I actually can give the length on each edge. So for each panel I've placed on here, here's how big they are. Actually, I'm summing up all the panels, I believe. And here's the deformation for each one of those panels. I've got 48 panels. I think I actually summed up the overall lengths in this. I should probably go back and undo that. But you can see it's 1 foot 11.5 on this edge, and overall, I think this was a deformation in the middle is what this client wanted. Here's how far it's deforming in the middle, and it gives you the quantities of each one of those panels. So what was nice on this object is what they wanted to do is basically do 2 separate mass types. So I created that deformation panel, and I had 2 different mass types. This one is where it's like going straight up. This one is where it's more rotating around the building. So you can see there's slight differences to these. And the nice part about that was I could just go into the schedules, and then I could give the client every single one of the schedules and what the difference is and how far each one was deforming per the different types of masses. So kind of giving it, breaking it down to them. Here's really the difference in what's going on and how we can set it up. So really using this preliminary to define and help us come up with a definition of the criteria and how we're going to be modeling this and going through and setting it up. So I haven't seen any questions yet. So of course a couple people have left, so maybe they weren't that interested in my adaptive components. But we're going to keep continuing on, so no questions going on yet. So I'm going to close some of this stuff out. So the other thing that I wanted to show you is the space frame panel that I've done, because I do know my blog gets hit on this a lot. So it's basically the same thing. I created, in this case, it was a pattern-based, and I could go ahead and put that pattern-based on, but there's a couple things I wanted to show when creating a pattern-based like this that will really get into frustrations for you if you don't know what's on there. So let me get into my space frame panel. I'm just going to edit that. Oh, sweet. I can't hit edit family. I love it when Revit does that to me. Man, I got to actually go open it. Masses, panel, space frame. So with this family, it was basically the same thing. However, the difference is I started this one with a curtain panel pattern based. And the only reason I started with the curtain panel pattern based is it gives you these pre-laid out grids. And it'll allow you just to go in when you divide the surface, and automatically apply this, so I don't have to go through and pick the points. I also did this back in 2012 before we had the repeater command, so it was pretty much the best way to do it back then. But the one thing I wanted to start pointing out when you get into a lot of this stuff is if you do a single sweep on an object, so this family, let me get rid of the sweeps here and just kind of show you guys what's involved in this family. This family wasn't much different than what you saw. I've had these 4 points here, right? The 4 adaptive points, 1, 2, 3, 4. I drew, well, actually there were already reference lines drawn inside of there, but I hosted these points on these adaptive components. I grabbed that point and gave it an offset value. I did the same thing all the way around. I then hosted this point centered on the reference line. So this one's centered in the middle, and then I drew a line between there and hosted a point in the middle. Then once that point was hosted in the middle, I connected it with the other reference line. So not that big of a deal, pretty much the same thing what I just did with all those reference points and reference lines in the other file. But what's different on this one that I did is I simply then just took these, drew some circles on there, took the circle and the line I wanted and said create form. Okay, I'm going to undo that because I already have multiples of those. So same thing down here. If you start looking, I hosted a point on this line, then I could come in here and I could probably grab it over here as well and say create form. So I went up and over, just created all of those forms, and this created my mass. The one thing that was really weird to me, and I'm going to show you this, is when I do this mass, let me just delete these masses. I think I'm going to lose my circles though. Let's see. Nope, they're still there. So when I do these, there's a couple differences that happen here. So again, I'm just going to grab this circle, I'm going to grab that line and all 4 of these and say create form. Oh, I must have missed the circle. Let's try that again. Helps if you get the circle, otherwise you just get an extrusion. So there's my form there. And I'll hide that form because I probably should have grabbed these little small circles first. I'll create that form. And then, of course, my other circle's dead center. But there's one thing I want to show you here, and this gets me every time when I create the family. I forget to, oops, escape out. I forgot to grab the line. It gets me every time I go to start creating these families is, if we look at the differences between this one, notice how when I grab this extrusion, the lock profiles or unlock profiles is grayed out. But when I come in here and grab this single extrusion, it's not set to be lock profile. And what's weird about this is I have those circles being parameterized for diameters or radii. So if I come in here and grab my minimum radius, and I go ahead and say I want this to be, I don't know, we'll say 6 inches. When I do that, notice my, I don't know what you want to call this, my banana effect. So when you have a single extrusion in an adaptive component, or I should say a single sweep, you need to make sure you come up here and hit the lock profile button. So when I grab that lock profile button, now when I go back in here and change that minimum radius to be 6 inches, it's going to come up here and lose the banana effect or balloon effect or whatever you want to call that, and bring it to come through. I struggled for a very long time, so I went, what the heck? So I started putting 2 circles on everything and extruding both of them so it would go through and set up. It was a royal pain. And then I was actually at an ARTC class, I think, about 3 years ago, and somebody showed me the lock profiles button. So nice little feature you have there. But what you'll see on this one, I'll go ahead and load this into, well, no, we already have it now. We'll load it into my bubble tower. We'll really beat up my bubble tower here. What's great about that is when you divide the surface like this, I went through and manually put it in, but if you have a no pattern surface, You can also swap it out to be something you've created. So, oh gee, I want to go ahead and use that space frame curtain panel that I've created. So it's a curtain, it's a generic model, pattern based is what those are called. So now I can just say use this object, and I don't have to go through and place it point by point by point by point. It'll just place it on all those points for me. So as you can see, there we go, it's divided. Sometimes it puts them in the wrong direction. Not a big deal, so I really probably didn't want that space frame on the outside. Maybe I wanted it going vertical. When you grab these objects, there's a component mirror and a component flip. So you can go through and grab the component flip and watch them all flip. Actually, I don't think this is going to do anything. I think flip is going to go side to side, which that's not going to do a whole lot. And then you also have component mirror and component rotation. So if you've done an adaptive component like this and it goes in sideways or backwards, you don't have to go recreate the thing to see it's going the other direction. They've built in tools for us to do flipping, mirroring, and rotating as well. I wasn't expecting it to take this long. I should have divided it into less grids. So as you can see, oh, I was right. Flip moved it to our mirror, moved it to our flip, moved it to the inside, and we'll go ahead and see what mirror does on the other side. I was hoping those would go vertical. Okay, so really great features that you can go through using these adaptive components. It's one of those things I'm trying to get everybody to understand. You really need to go in there and start getting into some of that stuff, seeing what's going on, really using some of those tools we have to bring in the objects we're looking at there. Okay, we're still sitting here churning away. And I guess component mirror didn't do anything on this one. So mirror didn't do a whole lot, which I didn't think it was going to, because it basically mirrors it from the right to the left, and since this is a symmetrical object, it's not going to really do anything for us. But then you could go in and rotate your component as well if you wanted to. So you only get like 90 degree, 180 degree rotations, but it will allow you to go through and do your rotations on there to get it the right direction. So, and you can do some pretty crazy things with some of these masses, like you saw in the original family that I had on the image for the PowerPoint and coming into this. A lot of crazy things going on inside of there. Okay? So there you go. Now I rotated them. That was more what I was expecting it to do. Probably not in reality, but it looks cool anyway. So the new Revit radio tower stand. Good. So the next thing I did want to show is I do want to get into opening up another file we're going to have here. Okay, let me go ahead and hit my open button. No, I don't need to save the project. So I'm going to go ahead and do this test project I have here. So what we did with this one, and there's a whole bunch of engineering that's happening inside of here with the point of this. I'm not saying by any means you should be replacing your walls with adaptive components, but I did want to show the fact that, let me get rid of this little roof we have modeled in here, that with this object, when we get into here, that you can see there are these two adaptive placement points. So there's a couple differences in your adaptive points, but what's great about this is if I can find that point, where'd it go? It's right there. When you grab some of these placement points inside of there, not placement points, I forget, I'll have to look, you can come up here and choose a host. So what's great about this is you're noticing that these aren't actually doing anything to the project. What those are doing in this file is they're reacting to the levels. So when I come in here and say, gee, I wanted to move this level down to be 12 feet, it's going to take that point, move the point down, which is actually what controls the height of this wall, as well as my thicknesses. So my thicknesses of these objects will also change. This is supposed to be representing a very schematic CMU wall. So I can have this go from 6 inches to 7 inches or whatever, depending on the value. So you can see both now they're at 7 5/8 of an inch. I believe if I go make this 24 feet, I forget what my value is set to. This should jump up to 8 5/8 or 9 5/8 or, no, I don't know what that value is set to. I keep forgetting. But those points are going to come in and be hosted on those levels. So if we go edit this family, the only real difference is I placed a reference point, and then I selected the reference point and made it adaptive. just like I did with any other one, but over here you have what are called shape handle points. So shape handle points will allow you to host the things in the project to also help control what's going on inside of there. So you can grab it, rehost it after you've placed the family, go through and set it up, and that's what we've used on this one to really start getting into some of the engineering values to basically go in there and say, hey, if the height is greater than this, go 7 5/8. If not, go the 9 5/8. We really tried starting to come in here, and then you can start to see that, oh, once we get into 7 5/8 or 9 5/8, what's going to be the total weight? Desi was using that for some engineering to be able to go through and plug some of this stuff out. So it's really nice to be able to go inside of here, figure this out, as well as we've calculated the lengths on each side so we can go in and give a report, use that for some of the engineering, etc. So using these adaptive components at the very beginning to just simply help, hey, if we're doing a layout on this and these are the loads, etc., how big does this wall need to be?
And that kind of ties in with the question that David had. What are the most common applications of this adaptive components or of adaptive components in a real-world project for architects that you've seen?
Well, with the exception of the bubble, the deformation panel I've used with several clients as they're doing like a nice canopy and they're going to panelize the canopy, or they're doing a panelized wall system. How far out of deformation is this going to be? Are we actually going to be able to build that? Because they want to know that if it's within 1/2 inch, we can build that without having to tweak it. So I've definitely used that in a project. Obviously, Desi and I are testing this one out to kind of use it for engineering tools to get into this. But like what I showed last month with, I use it a lot for doing crickets. I also created a growing vault. I don't think I saved that one in my file. So somebody wanted a really quick growing vault for one of their projects. I went ahead and just did it real quick. I mean, it took me like a couple minutes to create the growing vault. So we've got the double vaults going each direction. Loaded that into a project, hosted it to the edges of the wall. So as the walls grew, it grew with it. Worked really well. It's just really starting to get your ideas out there and what you want to do. I also know the Revit Wiki helped retweeted somebody who had to do a handrail on, it was like a bridge, a little pedestrian bridge, and it had this big, huge arc going into it, and they wanted the handrail to follow the arc. So they created an adaptive component, made sure everything was vertical, and did a handrail. Looked like a handrail at the very least for going up over an arc. So there's a lot of different ways to start using the flexibility of adaptive components. Is really where can you think. The only drag part to some of those are, and I'm trying to get to one of my adaptive components I've got open.
I really liked your
a UFO
analysis. Well, your UFO. Your analysis tool that you created for that control tower, so that you could say, oh, these panels are too far deformed and will break.
Yeah, and you can even take it a step further and have it change colors as the deformation changes, which I have another panel from back in 12 where I did that. But one of the things to me inside of here that I get frustrated on is these are the only categories we can change them to. So yes, I might be able to go in and, you know, make this be some sort of structural tool, but I can't add it to the wall. So you've got a few categories. You can change them from generic models to be furniture systems, to be furniture, to be entourage, whatever you may be, but they're not all there. Railings are there, which is a nice thing. So when I load it into a project, it'll turn on and off the visibility graphics and railings. It'll schedule with railings, etc. But some of the other tools, like, man, I really want this to be X, and I can't get it to be there. So I'm also debating with the repeater command and some of the features we can have, possibly nesting in casework. So I could just go draw casework and say, give me 10 cabinets, and it'll scale the casework accordingly. But then again, you know, is that, you know, a lot of different tools and how you can get it to work. I had somebody create adaptive component because around every window, it was existing windows and they were all different sizes. They wanted to be able to just snap to the windows and put the lintel and the sill in an existing building, so we did it that way. They also had some where the arcs were different at the top, so we created an adaptive component with an arc's top. I mean, a lot of different ways to get this to start working.
Well, real good. Brian, do you have anything else you want to show here this afternoon?
Nope, that was pretty much the end of it, since there was only a couple of questions that came up.
All right, folks. Well, it's always good to have you. We're always happy to put on these webinars, and hopefully they're of benefit to you. This was a fairly complex subject today, but hopefully you're able to take something away from it. I'm sure you will. And let's see, there's our information. You can look up, you can always follow Brian Mackey Consulting's or BD Mackey Consulting's blog and website, and also the CAD-1 website. These webinars will be posted. This one will be posted probably early next week. So.
And if you guys are looking for them, just go to YouTube and search CAD-1 Presents, and they're all under the CAD-1 Presents directory.
Yep. So anyway, thanks very much, and we will see you on the flip side.